We've already seen what it means for there to be a relation between two sets of numbers. In that last example, we had one set of numbers being mapped to a second set of numbers. And there were inputs and outputs, or as we call them, there was a set of elements that were in the domain and a set of elements that were in the range. And the elements in the domain were mapped to elements in the range. A function, which is what this podcast is going to be about, is a specific type of relation. It's a type of relation where each input is mapped to exactly one output. Now, anytime you see something, if I'm telling you that this is a function, then you automatically know it is a relation. Just like if I say, here's a dog, you know that dog is going to be an animal. All dogs are animals. All functions are relations. Where we have to be careful is determining whether something is a function. So if I just say here, this is a relation, you need to think about, well, is it a function? So going back to that analogy I just used, all dogs are animals, but if I just said here's an animal, you don't necessarily know it's a dog. We have to look at it. We have to maybe talk to biologists if you really get in depth, but whatever it is, you need to determine whether or not that animal is a dog, just like we need to determine whether or not a relation is a function. So let's look at these two examples. Remember, a function has one input and it's mapped to exactly one output. So in this down here, we need to determine whether or not these two relations are functions. We can already see that this first example here is a relation. We have a set of numbers being mapped to another set of numbers. And we see here that we have 3 is being mapped to 1, 4 is being mapped to 2, and 5 is being mapped to 2, and 5 is being mapped to 3. And the analogy that I like to use is this is almost like a soda machine. Now, if you go up and you press the different buttons for 3, you know that a 1's going to come out of that machine. If you go back 5 minutes later and press 3, you always know that 1's going to be coming out. If you press 4, you know what to expect. You're going to get 2. The problem arises when you go to that soda machine and you press 5. If I press it, maybe I'll get a 2. I can go back 5 minutes later and press 5, and it would maybe give me a 3. And just from that, we can see that that machine wouldn't be functioning properly because it's giving you 2 different outputs. So this example right here, we would write no. This is not a function, and the reason why is because of 5. 5 is mapped to 2, but 5 is also mapped to 3. Therefore, this is not a function. This input of 5, does not have exactly one output. In this particular example here, 5 has 2 different outputs. So this would not be a function. This second problem over here, if we needed to determine whether or not it was a function, well, just think about if you go and press the button for 7. Do you always know what you're going to get? The answer is yes, you're going to get 11. What about 8? Are you always going to get the same thing over and over again? The answer is yes, you're going to get 11. And the most common problem is, well, this doesn't make sense because this output has 2 inputs. That's not a function. And this is a function, so I'm going to write yes. And we could be more descriptive about what kind of function this is, but if we're just asked if it's a function, you just want to write yes, and here's why. Each input, look at the inputs. If you pressed 7, you know what you're going to get. You're only mapped to 11, so you're always going to get 11, always going to get 11. And if you press the button for 8, you're not going to have 2 different things. You're just going to have 11. So that would be functioning. That machine would be functioning properly. And if we wanted to use the soda machine analogy again, this is similar to a soda machine that just has 2 different buttons. If you go up to a soda machine and it has 2 buttons for Coke, well, you could press either one and expect to get a Coke. So this is allowed. We can have 2 inputs mapped to the same output. The problem arises when the input has more than one. We need the input to have exactly one output.